Okay, so in this video, I wanted to cover some of the specific JavaScript topics that are helpful to know whenever you're dealing with React applications. So there's a lot of videos out there that talk about the fundamentals of JavaScript and functions and variables, and that's all great. But when you're talking about React specific, there are some things that you will encounter yourself that you'll have to write. You may see them in videos or in tutorials that you come across. They're kind of specific topics that you'll see quite a bit inside of React. I don't want to cover them. First one is arrow functions, and what they are shorthand ways of writing functions. And again, all of this that I'm talking about is because what we're doing with React is we're creating applications that are dynamic and using a contract called JSX. And JSX is nothing more than just think of it as JavaScript and HTML kind of combined. So if you were to, so it's a way of kind of combining both of those together to create dynamic applications. All right. As you start to look at this, you'll start to see what I'm talking about. But because of that, because we're trying to write these concise combined structures into one type of document, we want to make sure our code is concise and not too verbose. So there are a lot of things that have been added to JavaScript to allow us to write code that's simpler to see and is not as wordy, is probably the best way to describe it. Okay, and things like arrow functions and tyranny operators and some of the other things we can do will help us so we don't have to write loops as much, or we write them in a slightly different format, and it just fits better when you're writing in applications that are going to be doing JSX React style applications. All right, so arrow functions, and just to kind of set the stage, so we all kind of know we can create functions like this where you have a function, the pre-keyword function, you've got some function name, you can have some parameters that you can put in there, and then you've got some statements in here, right? Console log, whatever. So that's kind of how we've traditionally written functions. Arrow functions are kind of a way for us to be able to leverage a more concise way of writing it. And we can also take advantage of anonymous functions that we can use within JSX. And just to kind of see how they would look, once I write this out, you'll kind of see it's not much different. But so I've got the word const, and then you've got the name of your function, and then what you're going to have is an equal sign, and you're going to have your parentheses, and then you're going to have the equal with the greater than symbol. And that's where it gets the arrow from, followed by your curly braces that represents where you're going to put your function body. That's the statement in. Now, looking at them on the surface, there's not much different. They look the same, but at least the same amount of code. But there are some things we can do with this here. For example, there are situations where we don't even have to include the function name. Okay, that's when you have a function that doesn't have a name, those are anonymous functions. Okay, so we can create anonymous functions using the same syntax. And then it's also helpful when we want to talk about writing callback functions. Okay, both these things are kind of talking more about asynchronous style programming, where you want to call back a function later on once the function is done, or whatever operation you try to do asynchronously is completed and it's coming back. Okay, you can have what are called callback functions. Okay, so arrow functions allow us to write code and utilize callback style functions. All right, so we'll see this a couple different ways. I'm going to give you a little bit of a snippet here of what it would look like inside of React. So this is JSX. So again, as I mentioned, it's a combination of JavaScript and HTML together. But what I can do is, you'll see this a lot. So first here is a React component. So React components are just functional components like this. They all use, they're just a function that returns back JavaScript and HTML together, or other words, JSX. So all it's going to do is it's a function that returns that code. So so we can write it in the same fashion, okay, with the anonymous function. So you'll see React style components with that structure. Okay, so just when you see this, understand that this is actually nothing more than a arrow function. arrow function we've created. The other thing you'll see here is within a, for example, let's say I have a button, and we've kind of seen this before probably if you've done any kind of JavaScript, where you typically would have some function that you would want called whenever a button is clicked, right, on the onClick function. So we can actually leverage that arrow function syntax exactly the same way, and we can actually create what are called anonymous functions. So I didn't even have to include the name of the function here. It's an anonymous function. It's getting created right there in line. And I also can put my statements directly together. So again, more concise. So it's definitely something that's used quite a bit inside of React to be able to use arrow function and anonymous functions to signify a function call within some portion of JSX. Again, trying to keep the number of lines of code that you're writing as concise as possible. Okay, so those are arrow functions. You'll see this used quite a bit. Second thing, which is also kind of on a similar vein, is something called tyranny operators. So let's say that I have a variable 18. I'll say 10. So say variable 10, the age of someone is 10, and I can say if age is greater than or equal to 18, then I want to console log the word adult. Otherwise, I want to console log the word child. Right? So just a simple if then else statement. And you can kind of see, again, not terrible, but there are a number of lines of code here. We've got to have 1, 2, 3 extra lines of code just because we want to write out something that's either going to be based on a condition, one thing or another. Okay. And because that's used quite a bit, we have the ability within JavaScript to use this new operator that allow us to write this all in a single line of code. So instead of writing what you see there, I would write it this way instead. So let me go ahead and comment this out. And instead, write it all in one line of code. Okay. So what you see here, this is equivalent to, more or less equivalent to that line of code. And the way you read it is you have a condition, you have a variable. In this case, we're setting a variable to either the word adult or the word child. So that variable is going to be set to one of the two. And it's going to be based on this condition. Okay, so you have a condition, and then you have a question mark, and then whatever is in between the question mark and before the colon, that is what happens when that condition is true. And then whatever is after the colon is what happens when that condition is not true. Okay, so essentially we have now kind of shortened this so that we don't have this many lines of code. We simply have it all on a single line, and then we're doing whatever we're doing with the variable. Okay, so tyranny operators are used a lot within JSX. So because we are using these conditions to perhaps decide whether or not we want to write something out or not. So for example, kind of another way of looking at it, again, this is more JSX, but something that looks like this, where I have a component, and that component is going to either return a div with the word adult, or it's going to return a div with the word child based on that condition. Okay, this again is JSX. So being able to write that all in one line is something we definitely want to do, because it does make our JSX a little bit cleaner when we're looking at it. Okay, so tyranny operators are used quite a bit. The third one is objects. So all languages have some type of objects. In Python, they're dictionaries. Java has hash maps. But within the object notation, and all they are is just a way for us to have something that's kind of combined into name value pairs. So here I have an object called person, and that person has a first name, age, and is married, and the first name is Bob, age of 18 is Mary is false. And obviously I could console log the values just like you expect, first name, right? So being able to do that is great. There are some things that we can do to make it easier to use and be able to pull out these values quicker. Because obviously, if I wanted to reach into the person object and instead of console logging, let's say I want to create variables for them. So let's say that I want to have a variable, something like this. Okay, I could do that, and then I can do this for every other property. Okay, so being able to grab the properties out of an object is done a lot. Okay, and in order to make that a little simpler, we have had a new feature added to JavaScript called destructuring. So instead of having to do this, instead what I can do is I can write something that looks like this. And what this is going to do is, and not parentheses, should be curly braces. So what this is going to do is it's going to go in and it's going to grab the specific values, and it's actually probably complaining because I have 8 somewhere else, I bet. Yeah, let me comment this out. Okay, so I am destructuring this. Essentially, I am grabbing all the values from the person and automatically assigning them to their own variables. Okay, so now I would be able to have a variable. When I get to line 45, there is a variable now called first name. Okay, so I can console log that if I wanted to. So I'm just trying to make sure it works. Let me just comment some of this other stuff out. All right. Now if I run this again, there it is. So essentially destructuring just is a way for us to pull the values out of an object very, very easily, and rather than having to do those assignments all at one time. So again, saving lines of code, right? So instead of having to have multiple assignments on different lines, I can do it all at one time. Okay, and you could use the same thing within arrays too. So the same destructuring works within arrays. Similarly, there is another operator that we have that is called the spread operator. So let's say that I wanted to, let me just comment this out for a second. So let's say that I'm not using destructuring, but let's say that I wanted to create another person object. And I'm going to say person2. And let's say that person2 needs to have all of the properties of person1. So what I can do is I can use the spread operator. And the spread operator is 3 dots followed by whatever object it is that you're trying to spread from. And what this will do is this will create a complete clone of all of the properties of person1 and create a new one for person2. So if I say console log person, and let's just do this again. All right, so if I run this, you'll see that both of lines that got written out both have all the same data. Okay, so I've essentially created a clone. So this is spread operator, says go give me all of the properties and assign them to whatever it is that's on the left-hand side. I have the option to, if I want. Let's say that I wanted the person object to have everything, but I want the age to be, I wanted the age to be 22. So if I do this, then person 2 will have all of the properties of person 1, except the age will be set to a new value that I've specified. And simply just by providing the name of the property that you're trying to use, followed by a colon, and then whatever new value you want to give it. So you can change that. So you can do the same thing with arrays. So if let's say that I have an array, and just create an array down here and show you what this looks like. So I've got an array called names of Bob, Tom, and Sally. And what I can do here is I can create a new array. And we will say that this new array has names. Okay? So names 2, and let's go ahead and print those both out again. Okay. All right, so if I run these, they're going to be exactly the same. So essentially I essentially copied an array, okay, using the spread operator. But what's also nice is that I can add new values in here along with that at the same time. Okay, so now if I run this, I'm going to get names 2 is going to have all the names from the first array, but it's also going to have one additional one called Fred. I can do the same thing and put that in front the same way. Actually, I already have Tom there. Let's go with Bill. All right, so if I run this again, you'll see that now I have an array. So the spread operator works on both objects and arrays, but it allows you to quickly kind of move around the data and be able to reach it and grab it and assign it to new properties and new fields and so forth. Okay, fourth one is array maps. So let's go ahead and comment all this out so we don't get ourselves in trouble. All right, so the fourth one is arrays, maps, and filters. And again, you're going to be using, since we're trying to combine both JavaScript and HTML together in JSX to create dynamic content, being able to iterate over something is important. So for example, if I have an array of names, okay, and let's say that I wanted to create an ordered list of, actually let's just do H1. So let's say I wanted to have an H1 element around each one of the names within my array. So what I can do is I can use the map function. So the way it works is within every single array, so names is an array, there is a map function, okay? And the map function takes in a function. So there we go, we're going to use our anonymous function that we already have learned about. And this function is going to be a callback. So every time there is every iteration that I have. So in this case, I have 3 names. So 3 iterations of map are going to get called. Every time it gets called, it's going to pass one of the names into whatever parameter I provide, whatever parameter name I gave it. So I have to give it a parameter name inside of my anonymous function. So first time through, name is going to be Bob, second time is going to be Tom, third time through is going to be Sally. So you can iterate over an array very easily, and I can do things like this. Okay, and this is JSX, so I can I can actually return JSX. So in this case, an H1 element, and inside the H1 element is going to be the name of whatever person whatever value it was that came into the function. Okay, so again, I could have done this with a for loop, but again, we're trying to avoid using loops and having long structures, and whenever possible, trying to put this on one line. And again, you can kind of see how I might be able to do something like this in my code, and looking at this inside of HTML, it might be a little bit more cleaner for someone looking at it rather than having a loop instead. So again, a very concise way of being able to iterate over an array and create H1 elements for each one, as an example. Filter is another function we have within arrays, and filters work similarly. So I have a names array, and there's a filter function. Again, it requires a callback. So you're going to have an anonymous function, and for every element in the array, just same way, right? It's going to call this function. And what filter does, it allows us to be able to filter out certain elements. Okay, so let's say that you wanted to have, let's say you had an array of 50 different things, but you only wanted to display a subset of them based on some criteria, because maybe you're displaying some structure, you have an ordered list and you only want to show users within a group, right, or something like that. You have some sort of structure you're trying to show, and you're trying to filter out ones that you don't want to see. So you can do that using the filter function. And actually, let me give you a different example. Instead of using names, let's use numbers. That's probably better. All right, so I've got an array of numbers, and I'm going to say numbers. And instead of name, I'm going to say number. Okay, so every number within my array, I want to return. And let's say that I wanted it to, let us say I wanted to only have numbers that are greater than 10 returned. So what I would do here is I would, inside of my function here, I would say return number greater than 10. So this is a conditional statement, and it's going to it's going to return either true or false, right? So it's going to be it's going to either return true or false. So if the number value that it got in the function was greater than 10, then that statement would be true. Otherwise, it would be false. So if it's false, it gets filtered out. If it's true, then it gets returned in whatever you're trying to do. So if you're trying to create additional arrays or whatever, you're trying to do something, you can use the filter function to filter out values based on some criteria that you have. So just remember with the, and this would not be map, this would be filter. Sorry, I did that wrong one. Get rid of that, sorry about that. So with filter, you're simply returning either, you have a function and you're returning either true or false. And if it's true, it gets included. If not, then it gets filtered out. That's where the term filter comes from. Okay, so map and filter are ones you will see quite often within React. Okay, so the last two kind of go hand in hand, and both 5 and 6 talk about asynchronous programming. So because we want our applications to be responsive, we don't want them to stop, and we don't want them to get blocked for something that's going to take a while. So that's where asynchronous programming is kind of beneficial in web-style applications, because there are times where something is going to take more than a couple of milliseconds. In that case, we don't want to block our application. Promises are structures that allow us to do that, and they are ways to be able to write logic. And I'll just kind of give you a quick little example of what that would look like. So you would have an object, and it's an asynchronous object that represents something that's eventually going to happen. All right, that's the best way to describe it. So here is my promise. Okay, so a promise is just an object, and it has a callback, and it's going to either be successful or fail. Okay, resolve or reject is is kind of related to what I'm talking about. So here I've got a simple little promise that I've created, and simply is going to delay execution for 4 seconds to kind of simulate something. Maybe you're going out to a database, right? But we don't want our programs to immediately pause and wait. Okay, we want them to continue on doing whatever it is they need to do, but we don't want the entire application to be blocked. So this will asynchronously go out and wait 10 seconds, or in this case 4 seconds, and then eventually we would get a success message if it's successful. So when you are using them, and again, I'm showing you both sides here. I'm showing you if you want to create them, and maybe you won't ever create promises, but you will definitely use them because they are used quite a bit within React. So let's say that someone else created this, and I have my special application here. It's a fetch application, right? And it's going to fetch some data, and then eventually I'm going to get back the results of that data. So the way that works is you call your promise, and then you wait for the then function. Again, the then function is going to be a callback. So again, another arrow function, and it's going to eventually call either the success message on then, or if there's an error, you're going to get the catch message. So you essentially will eventually get called, but you're going to use the then as your callback to know when the operation has completed and it's ready to give you the data back. Okay, that's kind of how promises work. Similarly, we can have what are called async await, and async await is another kind of variation to this asynchronous programming. Okay, so kind of what this would look like is you would have instead of having the promise and the try catch like you see there, or the then structure, because this is it could be kind of messy, but you'll see both used within React. Instead, you might see it written this way. So here you have and again, I'm using Axios. This is going to demonstrate if you wanted to get data from a database. I'm using this to show, actually in this case, getting data from an endpoint. I'm using this to show how I can fetch data. So what I'm doing here is I've created a function called fetch data, okay, and I'm using an arrow function here, but I am saying that it's an asynchronous function. By using the async function here, like you see, I essentially have noted that the function fetch data is asynchronous, and because I have set it as asynchronous, I can block certain things to wait for it to come back using the await keyword. So you can only use the await keyword inside of asynchronous functions. So what will happen here is the program is going to call fetch data. It's going to go out and call Axios to go to that endpoint. And again, all I'm doing here is getting my user information from GitHub. I'm calling an API. It's just a REST call. So this is going to give me back my data for me. So if I want to, let me go ahead and comment this all out. All right, come down here, and let me just go ahead and I'm going to use import. Okay, so I'm just going to import that function. And if I run this, eventually, there you go. So I got all my data back, so it worked. So this essentially would go off and respond, wait, and it's going to wait here while that response is happening, and then eventually it's going to return the data. So I have a main function, which also must be asynchronous because you must call these within an asynchronous function. So you can't use await outside of an asynchronous function. It has to be done inside of an asynchronous function. Okay, so essentially I'm setting that up. I am then going to call main, which is going to call fetch data and wait for the response to come back, and then I'm going to get the data that came back from fetch. Now what's interesting about this is because it's asynchronous, all right, and I'm just going to kind of show you that because it's an asynchronous call, the rest of the program is going to continue to do whatever it's supposed to do. So if I run this, you'll see immediately you can see it's kind of quick there, but you'll notice that the here string got written out immediately, and then eventually it got the response back from the call. So you kind of see the order there, that the asynchronous call went off and did its thing. It didn't block the program. The program continued on doing whatever else it could do, in this case writing out the console.log. So the program, when you have an asynchronous calls, it's going to basically take those off to another thread, and then it's going to wait for that thread to come back. But your program will continue to function. Everything else that's not being done asynchronous will continue to function, and the program's not going to get blocked. Okay, because even though it was waiting here, it knew that it had that line of code there. It did that line of code before the rest of the data came back. Okay, so that's kind of how asynchronous coding works, is that there are certain things that are happening in various times, and async and await kind of lets us kind of control that. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the 6 things that you should be aware of when you're dealing with React from kind of more advanced JavaScript concepts.